What happens when a millionaire forgets the woman who raised him, and his silence hurts more than betrayal? Ethan Roth returns home with his elegant wife, only to let the one person who truly loved him be humiliated right under his roof. But when the truth crashes down, he's forced to choose between pride and redemption. This is a story of dignity, heartbreak, and the price of silence. You won't believe what he does to make it right. Where are you watching from? Drop your city below, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful emotional stories that stay with you long after they end. The iron gates of the Roth estate creaked open slowly as the black Bentley rolled up the gravel path, tires crunching against stone like whispered warnings. Ethan leaned back in his seat, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The sight of the old manor rising in the distance stirred something deep in his chest. A blend of nostalgia, duty, and a weariness that came with confronting one's past. It had been nearly a decade since he'd last set foot here, and now he was returning, not as the boy who left, but as a man who had built his name in steel and code, in stock charts and strategy meetings. Beside him, Vivienne crossed one leg over the other, her designer heel tapping gently against the leather floor mat. Her gaze was fixed out the window, perfectly manicured fingers idly scrolling through something on her phone before she finally looked up. Her lips parted slightly as the estate came into full view, but the reaction was far from awe. "It's charming," she said, the way someone might describe an antique that had outlived its usefulness. Ethan glanced at her, then back at the long line of trimmed hedges, the stone lions guarding the entrance like sentinels of memory. "It's old," he admitted, "but it's home." Vivienne didn't respond. She simply slipped her phone back into her purse and adjusted the collar of her cream-colored coat. She had married into wealth, yes, but she had envisioned penthouses, glass walls overlooking the skyline, not towering ceilings and dust-scented libraries. Ethan knew that look on her face. He'd seen it often when she stepped into rooms she didn't yet own. She was evaluating what to keep, what to tear down. The car came to a slow stop at the main entrance, where a small group of staff waited in neat formation. Some faces were new, hired in his absence, but a few stood out, etched into his memory like figures from an old dream. And then, there she was, Clara, standing a little apart from the others, hands folded before her, posture regal despite her simple uniform. Her silver-streaked hair was tied back in a neat bun, and the faint lines on her face only seemed to deepen her grace. Ethan stepped out of the car before the driver could circle around. His shoes hit the stone with a familiar echo as he turned to offer his hand to Vivienne. She took it, stepping out with the elegance of a woman who'd walked countless red carpets. Her eyes scanned the entrance like a buyer at an open house. Then Ethan's gaze fell back on Clara. Their eyes met. A slow, tender smile bloomed on her face, and in an instant, something in him unraveled. "My boy," she said, her voice a soothing balm against the cold air. "You're home." He moved without hesitation, closing the distance in 3 strides, wrapping his arms around her as if time had folded in on itself. She still smelled of lavender and warmth, of quiet nights reading stories and gentle hands wiping away tears. "God, Clara," he breathed, "I missed you." She patted his back lightly, just like she used to when he was 8 and convinced monsters lived under his bed. "You look tired," she said, pulling back to study him. "Too much money and not enough rest, I'd wager." Vivienne watched the exchange with a tight smile, arms crossed. When introduced, she extended her hand and said all the right things, but Clara's brow lifted almost imperceptibly as their hands met. Vivienne's grip was cool, detached, transactional. They stepped inside together. Vivienne's heels echoed across marble floors that had seen generations pass. Ethan looked around, seeing ghosts of childhood in every shadow. Vivienne looked and saw a house in need of renovation. Neither of them said anything, but the difference hung in the air like fog. Somewhere deep inside, Ethan already felt it, the storm waiting behind polished doors. And Clara, ever watchful, already knew it had begun. The morning sun filtered gently through the high windows of the Roth estate, casting golden slats across the dining room as Ethan sipped his coffee, half listening to Julian recount an old story with exaggerated flair. Vivienne sat poised at the far end of the long mahogany table, nodding occasionally, though her eyes drifted toward the drapery, the light fixtures, the ornate wallpaper, as if tallying all the things she would change. Ethan noticed the way her gaze lingered on every corner, not with admiration, but with quiet discontent. Clara moved through the room with her usual grace, refilling glasses, straightening cutlery, her presence soft but steady. She had always carried herself with quiet authority, never demanding attention, yet somehow always commanding it. Julian raised his glass to her in passing. "Still the queen of the manor, eh, Clara?" To which she responded with a warm smile that didn't need words. But Vivienne, who had barely touched her breakfast, set her fork down with a light clink and leaned back in her chair, her tone feather-light. "It's so quaint how things are done here," she said, voice sugary smooth. "I've just never seen household staff dine with the family before." The table fell into an uneasy silence. Julian blinked. Beatrice's teacup paused mid-air. Ethan's fingers tensed slightly on the porcelain handle of his own. Clara, unshaken, turned toward Vivienne with the same calm expression she always wore. "I've been with this family for a long time, ma'am," she said evenly. "This has always been the way of things." Vivienne tilted her head, lips curving into a delicate smile. "Of course, every family has its traditions." Ethan cleared his throat. "Clara isn't just staff," he said, trying to soften the tension. "She helped raise me." "Which is why it's different," Vivienne replied, her voice still light but her eyes sharp. "I understand. I'm just not used to it, that's all." Clara nodded politely and moved on, but the energy around the table had shifted. Ethan stared down at his coffee, the silence ringing louder than any conversation. Beatrice resumed her tea, though her eyes never left Vivienne. Julian merely leaned back, watching the whole exchange like an audience member in a play he'd already seen before. Later that day, while Ethan attended to business calls in his study, Vivienne took a self-guided tour of the house, trailing her fingers along dusty banisters, stepping into unused sitting rooms as though inspecting a prospective purchase. Clara happened to be adjusting curtains in the east parlor when Vivienne entered. "These portraits," Vivienne said, gesturing toward the wall lined with solemn faces in gilded frames, "they make the house feel more like a gallery than a home." "They are the Roths," Clara replied softly, not turning from her task, "each one with a story, a life." Vivienne walked slowly, her heels tapping against the wood floor. "I suppose some stories are best left in the past. This place could use a fresh perspective." Clara folded the drapes back with precision. "Some perspectives are built over time, ma'am. This house remembers things." Vivienne smiled faintly. "Well, I suppose I'll have to teach it a few new things then." It wasn't the words themselves, but the tone, the glint behind the smile that made Clara pause. She turned just enough to meet Vivienne's eyes, calm and unreadable. But Ethan, standing unnoticed in the hallway just beyond the doorframe, had heard every word. He felt something twist in his gut, something he didn't want to name just yet. That evening, during a casual gathering in the sunroom, Clara brought a tray of wine glasses, gliding among the guests like she had 1,000 times before. But as she leaned to offer one to Vivienne, the younger woman's hand jerked, too quickly to be accidental. The crimson liquid splashed, striking Clara's blouse. A hushed gasp rippled through the room. "Oh dear," Vivienne cooed, pressing a hand to her lips with exaggerated innocence. "How clumsy of me." Clara dabbed at the stain without flinching. "It's all right, ma'am." But Ethan knew it wasn't. Not this time. Not anymore. The rain came unexpectedly that evening, draping the Roth estate in a thin mist as thunder rolled quietly in the distance. The dinner table had been set with its usual formality, crystal gleaming beneath the chandelier, linen napkins folded like origami at each place setting. Ethan sat at the head of the table, shoulders stiff, thoughts elsewhere. Vivienne, as always, was the picture of composure, her lipstick pristine, her conversation fluid and empty. She spoke of upcoming galas, new charity boards, and the need to modernize the West Wing. But her words barely registered with Ethan, who had spent the entire day reliving the moment the wine stained Clara's uniform. Across the table, Clara moved quietly, serving dishes as she always did. But Ethan saw the change, small, but there. The way her shoulders sat just a little heavier, the way her smile never quite reached her eyes. And for the first time, he couldn't pretend it wasn't his fault. Julian leaned close, murmuring, "Your wife's got quite the talent for accidents." His tone was flippant, but the meaning sharp. Ethan didn't respond. His fingers tightened around the stem of his glass. Beatrice, ever the observer, watched it all with a stillness that was more warning than serenity. Then it happened again. As Clara reached across Vivienne to adjust a serving spoon, Vivienne let out a dramatic gasp and jerked her arm just so. The movement sent her wine glass toppling, deep red liquid splashing across Clara's hand, soaking into the pale blue fabric of her uniform. A sharp silence fell over the room. "Oh goodness," Vivienne said, voice dripping false concern. "I really must be more careful." Clara stood motionless for the briefest second before dabbing the fabric with her napkin, her face unreadable. "It's all right, ma'am," she said quietly. But it wasn't. The silence that followed was heavier than anything Ethan had ever known. It pressed against his ribs, crawled up his throat. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words stuck, lodged between cowardice and fear. Clara gave a polite nod and excused herself, disappearing through the side door with the dignity that had never once faltered in all the years he'd known her. Beatrice set down her fork with a sharp clatter. "That is enough," she said coldly. Vivienne blinked, eyebrows rising in mock offense. "I beg your pardon?" "You heard me?" Beatrice replied, her voice cool and lethal. "I don't know what kind of behavior passes in your world, Vivienne, but in this house we do not treat the people who raised us like they're disposable." Vivienne let out a breathy laugh, her eyes wide in mock amusement. "Come now," she said. "It was an accident. Let's not overreact." Julian finally spoke, his voice dry and pointed. "You've had 2 of those in 3 days. Some pattern." Vivienne turned to Ethan then, her expression tight, searching, daring him. But Ethan said nothing, and in that silence something broke. Dinner continued in brittle fragments, voices thin and forced. When the last dish had been cleared and the room emptied, Ethan lingered. He sat staring at the dark spot the wine had left on the tablecloth, as if willing it to vanish would undo what had happened. It wouldn't. Later, when the guests were asleep and the storm had passed, he wandered the halls. He didn't know where his feet were taking him until he found himself standing outside Clara's quarters. The door was ajar, light spilling softly onto the hallway floor. He knocked once. Clara opened the door slowly. She had changed into plain clothes, her suitcase already packed and resting by the wall. Her face was calm. Too calm. "You're leaving," he said, though the truth already rang in his chest. She nodded. "Yes." "You don't have to," he whispered. Clara gave a tired smile, sad knowing heavy with years of unspoken things. "I stayed as long as I was needed, Ethan, but I am no longer welcome here." "That's not true," he said, voice cracking. She looked at him gently, like she had when he was a boy with scraped knees and a bruised heart. "Your silence," she said softly, hurt more than anything she could have done. And with that, she picked up her suitcase and walked away. The next morning came slowly, like an apology. Pale light spilled through the tall windows of the estate, brushing against walls that now felt hollow. Ethan stood alone in the dining room, untouched breakfast cooling on his plate. The house was quiet, too quiet. Without Clara, it was as if the soul had been stripped from its bones. She had always moved with such grace, her presence subtle but vital, like breath itself. And now, the air felt thinner. Vivienne had said nothing about Clara's departure. Over coffee, she merely commented on the weather and inquired about her pending shipment of Italian drapery samples. Ethan didn't answer. His mind was 1,000 miles away, or rather, just down the hill, where Clara had gone with her suitcase and her silence. Later that day, Julian found him standing at the edge of the rose garden, arms crossed, eyes vacant. "So," Julian said with uncharacteristic softness, "she's really gone." Ethan nodded. "You let her go." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I didn't mean to." Julian raised a brow. "Yeah, well, meaning to and doing something are 2 different things, little brother." There was no sarcasm in his tone, just a quiet truth. That night, after the estate settled into its usual rhythm of drawn curtains and distant footsteps, Ethan entered the bedroom he now dreaded. Vivienne stood at her vanity, removing her earrings with methodical grace. Her reflection met his eyes through the mirror. "You look exhausted," she said lightly, as if commenting on the color of his tie. He didn't respond. Instead, he stepped forward slowly, voice low but steady. "Pack your things." She paused, the earring midway to its case. "Excuse me? You heard me," Ethan said. "You're leaving." A soft laugh escaped her lips, thin and disbelieving. You're serious? Yes, Vivienne turned, arms folding. And where exactly do you expect me to go? I don't care, he said, no longer gentle. But it won't be here, not anymore. She stared at him for a moment, something cold flashing behind her eyes. All this, over a maid? Over Clara, he corrected, and over you. Over what you've done, over what I let you do. She scoffed. You'll regret this. He shook his head. No, Vivienne, I regret every second I stood by and said nothing. He left her there, mouth agape, fury trembling behind her perfectly curated expression. The hallway outside felt warmer somehow, less suffocating. But Ethan wasn't done. Not yet. At dawn, the estate was hushed under a sky the color of steel. Ethan didn't take the car. He walked. Through the dew-wet fields, past the weeping willows that once shaded him and Clara in the summers of his youth. The gravel path to town crunched beneath his boots, each step a reckoning. The small cottage sat nestled beneath an ivy-covered arch, its windows glowing faintly. He hesitated only briefly before knocking. The door opened slowly. Clara stood there in a simple blouse and wool skirt, her silver hair tied back. Her face was unreadable. I came to bring you home, he said. She didn't move. You waited until I left. I know. I was humiliated in the house I gave my life to, she said quietly. I know, he said again, his voice breaking. She studied him for a long time. Why now? Because I finally remembered who I am and who made me that way. Clara's eyes softened. Just a little. You let me be pushed out. I did, and I will never forgive myself for that, but I will earn it back if you let me. She opened the door wider. Inside, the kettle whistled, and the past, so long twisted in silence, began, slowly, to unwind. The scent of lavender still lingered in Clara's modest cottage as Ethan stepped inside. The space was small, humble, wooden beams overhead, a worn rug beneath his feet, and a fire crackling softly on the hearth. It smelled like tea and thyme. Mementos lined the shelves, photographs of the Roth estate, of Ethan as a boy grinning with a gap-toothed smile, his hand clutched tightly in Clara's. He swallowed hard, the weight of memory pressing into his chest. Clara poured him a cup of tea and set it on the small wooden table without a word. She moved slowly, not because of age but because she was carrying something heavier than years, something he had placed there. Ethan sat across from her, hands clasped tightly in front of him, shoulders drawn. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, he looked up. I let you down, he said quietly, in the worst way. Clara's eyes met his, calm but unreadable. She said nothing, allowing him the silence he had denied her for too long. I watched it happen. I saw how she treated you, how she looked at you like you were less, and I did nothing. His voice wavered. Not because I agreed, but because I didn't want to cause a scene, because I thought keeping the peace was more important. And was it? Clara asked gently. No, he whispered. Not even close. She leaned back slightly in her chair, fingers curled around the warm mug. You were always a good boy, Ethan, but being good isn't the same as being brave. Her words struck deep, not with anger, but with truth. He lowered his head. I wasn't brave. I let fear silence me. Fear of conflict, fear of losing her, fear of looking weak. And in doing so, I hurt you. The one person who never turned away from me, even when I gave you every reason to. Clara inhaled slowly, her expression softening. Why did you come today? Because I couldn't breathe in that house without you, he said. Because I finally understood that a home is not its walls, or its chandeliers, or the title over the gates. It's the people who made it feel like safety. And you were that for me. You always were. Clara looked down into her tea. For a moment, the only sound was the gentle clink of ceramic as she set the cup down. I should have left a long time ago, she murmured. But I stayed, because you were still there, because I believed you would see what was happening. I did, Ethan said. Too late, but I did. She studied him, searching his face not for apology but for resolve. And what happens now? I don't expect you to come back, he said. Not unless you want to, but I wanted you to know I ended things with her. She's gone, not just because of what she did to you, but because of what she made me become. Clara's brows lifted, her lips parting slightly in surprise. You let her go? I had to, Ethan said. I couldn't keep protecting someone who tore down the very foundation of what matters. I chose her once. I won't make that mistake again. The kettle hissed softly as the fire popped in the grate. Clara leaned forward, placing her hand over his, the same hand she'd once held when he had nightmares as a child. "You don't need me at the estate," she said gently, "but maybe it needs me. Just a little while longer." Ethan's throat tightened. "It needs you more than I can say." She stood, smoothing the front of her skirt. "Then finish your tea," she said with a quiet smile, "and tomorrow we'll go home." And so they did. The road back felt shorter, the estate less haunted. When Clara stepped through the doors again, the staff straightened, as though a breeze had returned to a breathless room. Ethan didn't make a speech. He didn't need to. He simply walked beside her. This time, without silence. Some stories linger not because of their grandeur, but because of the quiet truths they leave behind. Ethan's journey wasn't about grand gestures or noble sacrifice. It was about something more intimate, more human. The courage to admit when you're wrong and the strength to make it right. In a world where silence often protects comfort over justice, we're reminded that saying nothing can sometimes cause the deepest wounds. Clara didn't need revenge. She didn't seek validation. What she deserved was dignity, and what she gave was grace. And through her quiet strength, she taught us that family isn't always bound by blood. It's forged in loyalty, shaped by presence, and tested in the moments when standing up means standing alone. This story reminds us that legacy isn't about wealth, titles, or estates. It's about how we treat people when no one's watching, and how we respond when we finally see the damage we've caused. Ethan learned that healing doesn't begin with apologies. It begins with action, with change, with walking the long road back and asking for nothing but a chance to do better. If there's one lesson to carry forward, it's this. Silence is never neutral. It either protects injustice or breaks it. Speak up, stand tall, and never forget those who loved you before the world even knew your name. We'd love to hear where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments. And if this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt tales like this. We'll see you in the next one.